What happened to there's no black America? There's no black America. There is just America. What happened to it? America. What happened to it? There's no black America. There is just
Blue Lives Matter in America. Quite frankly, somebody with a nice tan needs to say this. All lives matter.
what happened to America? What happened to it?
Welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Const. We are starting up our RNC coverage every day this week from 3 o'clock Eastern to 4 p.m. And I think we're going to do it a little bit differently. You'll see what we're planning up. This is Republican National Convention, day one. Or we should say the Trump National Convention, day one. The pretense is gone. This is a party of one, Donald Trump. And it is all about him, of course. You might expect me to say that, believing as I do that he is a dangerous narcissist, fascist, and racist, and those are my more publishable thoughts. But I am not the only one that is saying this is all about one guy. The Republicans themselves are saying it. There will be no new party platform, for example, the RNC said, just an endorsement of Trump's America First agenda, whatever that is. Now, we all know a platform isn't everything, but not having one isn't anything, except the cult of personality the Republicans have become. A platform is a way in which a real political party fights through differences among its members publicly. Look at what just happened in the Democratic Party. Joe Biden cleverly used the platform to bring Sanders and his supporters, us, into the tent by accepting or acknowledging at least some of our views. It is not everything we want, but it is what a real political party does. That's a political party that believes in democracy. So killing the platform sets the stage for day 4 of the Trump National Convention. The Democrats have big disagreements, but the Republicans are coming apart at the seams. So how can we help them? Well, first, remember, Donald Trump is venal, but he is not crazy. He does things for a purpose, that's what I believe. And more often than not, our purpose is just the opposite. And we should say so, now, while people are actually listening. 22 million people tuned in last week to the DNC and to the infomercial. Take his ugly appeal to white voters in the suburbs. It is 1988 all over again. They are coming to get you. Trump hasn't found a Willie Horton yet, but he's basically saying that crime and race riots are running rampant in Democratic-controlled cities. And a vote for Joe Biden is a vote to bring that to the white neighborhoods. Okay, it is up to Joe Biden to respond, and not to make the mistake that Mike Dukakis made and let the Republicans define him. But as for progressives, there is a job too. We have better ideas, as we know, and Trump's strategy is to divide working people from white working people from working people of color. His strategy is using racism to bind them to what's truly in their interests. That game has held this country back for more than 100 years now. And we have to stop it here, now, in this election, while history is on our side, while demographics are on our side. Our story of Medicare for all, effective climate action, getting off of fossil fuels, equity and social justice is the better path, whether you live in Lake County, Ohio, or Ferguson, Missouri. Trump will not tell you that. And we will see if Biden does. But I just did. There is more to listen for this week. Trump's strategy is to win through racial division. His key tactic is to drive down voting among those who are not with him. We need to fight that. Pay attention to the details of what he says and does. It is true, he is trying to rally his so-called base, but that's only half of what he's up to. You will hear things this week designed to make working people doubt other working people, to make Latinos wonder if they should be in the same party as black voters, and vice versa, to make people forget that they are out of work or convince them that help is around the corner. Just enough people. The Financial Times had a good scoop today. Trump's minions are thinking of giving emergency permission for a British vaccine to be brought to the U.S. before the election, even though U.S. clinical trials won't be finished. If I had not already named this the Trump National Convention, I might call it the Great Gaslight Convention. Remember, gaslighting is more than just lying. He will be trying to convince just enough people that the world is still flat. And if he kills a few people by bringing a vaccine to the market too quickly, for him, what the hell? 179,000 Americans are already dead thanks to his bungling of the pandemic. Now, you may be tempted to tune out of this convention. I get it. Who could possibly blame you? But if you can stomach it, there is a value in hearing what Trump says, as he will every night, as he makes gaslighting great again. Our country is really at a crossroads. This is real carnage, not Trump's Steve Bannon-inspired rhetorical carnage. This is economic carnage. We don't even really know how bad it is yet because of how bad it is. A reasonable number is we will need 30 million new jobs just to get back to where we were. Greatest inequality in the last 100 years. That's where we were before the pandemic. That's a big lift, but surely it is a big opportunity too for progressives. Can we seize this moment and make sure that there are good jobs, jobs that pay a living wage, increasing that living wage, that just don't hurl workers into the bowels of the gig economy? We won't hear Donald Trump talk about this, but we can, while everyone is listening. And the more we do, and the more voters do, that's how it goes. The more Joe Biden will get it too. So here on our show, the Nomiki Show, we are going to watch the Trump National Convention closely and share with you what we see and hear. We are kicking off the coverage today with a great show with interesting guests. We have David Daley, who is an expert on rat fucking and how the Republicans have been messing with us. And later, we are going to have a discussion with a real Trump surrogate, Scotty Hughes. She is somebody I used to debate on cable news, especially in 2016 when they pit Bernie Sanders surrogates against Donald Trump's surrogates. So you want to stick around. But first, if you are not already, make sure to hit that like and subscribe and alert button. Just ding it. Just smash it right now, because that's how you're going to know when our show goes up every day at 3 p.m. Eastern. I had to tell my dad how to do this yesterday. He didn't understand. So I had to walk him through it. Make sure to hit smash, like, the alerts. And if you're not already, please join us on Patreon. That's how we're putting the show together for as low as $5 a month. Patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Up next, we have David Daley, who's going to help us make sense of this whole mess. And we're going to continue to do that throughout the week. But stay tuned for a quick break, and we'll be back with David Daley.
America, there is just America! What happened to it? America! What happened to it? There's no black America. There is just
Blue lives matter in America. Quite frankly, somebody with a nice tan needs to say this. All lives matter.
what happened to America? What happened to it?
There will be good times and hard times and unexpected turns. It will not be a Trump contest without excitement and drama. If you want someone to fight for you and your country, I can assure you, he's the guy. He will never ever give up. And most importantly, he will never ever let you down.
America! What happened to it?
Those in favor of
Donald Trump.
Man, I was muted. I was just saying, I don't know if I could do a week of that. Dorsey, our producer, put that together, surprised me. It's fascinating. It's not like the Macarena last week, the DNC's Macarena. I could at least dance. This is horrifying to me every time I see them speak. David Daley, we're really excited to have you. Is David in? I don't see David in yet. Hey, there we go. You know, the joys of Zoom. Ooh. You there?
I'm right here.
Ah, there you are. Fantastic. David Daley is the author of Rat Fucked, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, how Americans battle to save democracy. You're the former editor-in-chief of Salon. David, this is like, I mean, I've been waiting to have this conversation with you because there's just so much happening at once. It's obviously by design. You've been covering this stuff for years. Is there any turning back in a Biden administration? This is a big question. There's so much to unravel and fix. Is there any turning back?
That's a great question. I mean, so much of that is going to depend on what happens with the Senate. So much of that's going to depend on what happens with individual state legislatures around the country this year. And so much of it depends on what happens with our judiciary. It's going to depend on whether Democrats are willing to stand up and sort of do the structural fixes to the Supreme Court, the structural fixes to the U.S. Senate, the structural fixes with perhaps even adding states to the nation to sort of bring us up to date and to undo the rabid anti-majoritarianism that Republicans have been taking advantage of over these last few years. They've really knotted the system up in profound and serious ways, and it's not going to be hard. It's not going to be easy to unravel. It's especially not going to be easy to unravel if Democrats don't have the courage to step up and do serious reform.
Let's go back to just the Obama era for a second, because clearly George W. Bush put quite a bit of damage on this country, and I don't think we've ever really recovered. But do you think that the Obama administration really stepped up its game in recognizing, how to I mean, I'll use the EPA as an example. Just eliminating decades of research in the EPA happened under the Bush administration in efforts to, prevent research from going out that acknowledged climate change, just to throw that one out there. But do you think that the Obama administration did that? Did the work?
No, I don't think they did anywhere near enough of the work that had to be done. And as we are in this process right now of somehow rehabilitating George W. Bush, I mean, one thing the Trump presidency has done is it's raised the stock of George W. Bush, the man who trashed the economy and led us into two of the worst foreign policy disasters this country has ever had. So, in my new book, in Unrigged, I spent some time on the road with Eric Holder, who is trying to lead the Democratic strategy back on redistricting. And I think to back up the story just a little bit, when Obama gets elected in 2008, I think a Democratic Party thought that they had this coalition of the future built, that the demographic changes that had happened to the nation were going to lock them in power for a generation to come. And what Republicans realized was that the 2008 election, as historical as it was, the 2010 election could be much more consequential if they could capture state legislatures around the country, control every seat at the table in redistricting in swing states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Texas, Florida, and remake the country in their image. And they did this in 2010. They were clear about what they were going to do. Karl Rove has an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in March 2010 that lays the whole plan out. Democrats were asleep at the wheel. When I met with Holder, I asked him, so when did you first hear about the Republicans' redistricting efforts? And he said, well, Barack Obama and I were meeting in the Oval Office. It was about a month after the 2012 election. And we thought we had a pretty good night, but the numbers were so bad. And we couldn't figure out why we hadn't done better in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina. They didn't know about this in December of 2012. We are still living with the consequences of this nationally. We're living with the consequences of it in state after state. And it effectively meant that Obama had to govern in his entire second term through executive order. And what we've all seen is how quickly executive orders can be undone.
Exactly. as I'm sure you're aware, I was part of this DNC fight to reform the Democratic Party, and this is a big topic that was brought up internally at the Democratic Party. It's been going on for years before Obama. Was how much is the Democratic Party apparatus able to fund, or should they fund, state parties? Because that's where you generate, the movement that builds the candidates and builds the infrastructure to run people in these legislative seats. And under the Obama administration, notably, I think at the end of the day, the number was somewhere around 1,200 legislative seats and congressional seats were lost. So, I mean, does Eric Holder recognize that creating a national party that doesn't really have a base other than Washington, D.C. Is needed?
I do. I think that Democrats, it took them a long time to realize it. And, again, we're living with the consequences of this deeply anti-majority rule that has taken place all over the country. I think that what we have seen on the ground is a whole lot of new progressive energy from groups like Run for Something, from Forward Majority, from Sister District, from Movement Voter Project. It's all of these new groups that didn't exist in 2016 that recognized that the National Party was not doing this kind of work, and that the Democrats were getting their lunch money taken away from them in state after state after state. They weren't running candidates in these races, in state legislative races, partially because they were so gerrymandered that nobody could possibly win. But that means that nobody in some of these districts was even hearing from or talking to somebody with another point of view. And the muscles just atrophied. And it's been good to see the insurgence of that progressive energy
out of nowhere after Trump. Yeah. I mean, but what's crazy about it is part of that is you're building a pipeline of not just leaders, but staffers, people who have institutional knowledge, so that, if, say, like a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren were elected, you had people who you could bring in that were part of the next generation. And something that I hear just repeatedly is how much people are having to learn on the spot right now in the movement. And I mean, it's unfortunate because that's what the Republicans have done so well. So in terms of the Republicans, I mean, clearly demographics have not been on their side, which has been all over the place on issues. And it really has been a very calculated strategy in how to maintain control through gerrymandering, courts, et cetera. But this started, did this start with the Koch brothers, or have they been doing this for years?
Well, I think Republicans understood the value of local government and state governments and ALEC. You can trace a lot of this back to the early 1970s. You've got the founding of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which essentially does cookie-cutter conservative legislation for state legislatures. You trace that back to the mid-1980s. I think that Republicans have understood for a long time that the demographics of a changing nation are not on their side. And when you have that kind of desperation, they've had two options, right? You can either try to adjust your message and your messengers for a changing America, which was what the 2012 autopsy report suggested they do, or you can run the kind of play that they've been running and just keep putting barriers up between people and the right to vote. So that includes gerrymandering. It includes the 59 million Americans who live in a state in which one or both of the state legislatures are controlled by the party that won fewer votes in 2018. And by the way, all of those 59 million people live in a state in which Democratic candidates won more votes and Republicans hold all of the power. There have been 32 million Americans purged from the voting rolls over the course of the last 4 years since the 5-4 conservative majority in Shelby County versus Holder allowed that to happen by hollowing out Section 5 of the Voting Rights back in 2013. There have been thousands of precinct closures, all of the new voter ID bills that have been surgically focused to target young voters and minority voters, communities of color. You see rollbacks in the days of early voting. And what we have seen in the middle of a pandemic is that all of these state legislatures continue to be willing to put barriers between people and the right to vote, whether it's in Wisconsin back in April, in which they forced voters to the polls in the middle of a pandemic, whether it's Georgia back in June, in which voters had to endure lines as long as a line's as long as a work day to cast their ballot in Texas and so many other states in which you might not be able to vote absentee without an excuse, and a pandemic is not enough of an excuse, or Oklahoma and Wisconsin that want you to get your ballot notarized or witnessed by two people.
Notarized? I got a notary today. It took an hour and a half to find a notary, just to put that in perspective.
Right.
It was maddening. I couldn't do it at the bank. I couldn't do it at the post office. I couldn't do it it's
like trying to find a fax machine or something.
That's exactly.
I mean, who does this?
So let's start off with the post office. What can we prepare for going into this election? I mean, we all know the game here. It's to suppress votes, and it's to suppress votes in specific, parts of the country in which they want to keep we're seeing in these primaries just the rate of voting is so much higher than it's ever been. And it just shows you if we had universal voting, we would be in a completely different situation, which progressives would probably be winning. People of color would be winning. So that's their game here, right? They want to suppress voters from turning out. But what's the state right now? I mean, we had the postal the postmaster general is being questioned right now. What does that mean?
I think the president can't cancel the election, but he can certainly work to sabotage it. He can work to sort of undermine the legitimacy and the confidence that people have in the results. And that is definitely what he is doing. They're trying to starve the post office at exactly the moment in time in which we're counting on the post office to run what would be a national vote by mail election in many ways. A lot of states going from 10 or 12% of the vote being mail-in early vote to upwards of 70%.
That's amazing.
It's really hard to do under perfect circumstances, let alone in the middle of a pandemic without enough money and funding coming from the federal government, and with the government intentionally now trying to kneecap the Postal Service as we get to 70 days out by getting rid of these sorting machines, by eliminating overtime, by requiring that ballots be sent via first-class mail. And the post office has now told 46 states in an official letter that they cannot guarantee that they will be able to deliver ballots in time to meet deadlines in all of these states, which means if we're doing an election day is November 3rd, you probably have to have your ballot in the mail by October 17th, October 18th, if you want to be certain that that vote is going to count. And in 34 states, including a lot of battleground states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, if your vote arrives on November 4th, it is going to be thrown in the mail. It's going to be thrown in the trash can, even if it's postmarked October 31st or November 1st. So we have already seen hundreds of thousands of ballots in the middle of the primaries arrived too late. They're being thrown aside. So if we're going to do a vote by mail election with the post office in this state, it's going to be a real challenge.
Is there anything that courts can do, whether it's the Supreme Court or local courts can do to fight that off? I mean, I know New York has a history, as I'm sure you know, of voter purging, even though it's a Democratic state, Democratic controlled state. And many of the, in the hearings that they've had, they've talked about how people think that it's about postmarking their ballot, not receiving, because how do you know when it's going to be received? It's you can't.
And these days it might not even be postmarked. Right. That's one of the things that the Postmaster General was being questioned about today. He was being asked why so much mail is not even carrying postmarks. So this is a 5-alarm fire, and we're not treating it that way. We are fewer than 70 days ahead of a national election, and the conditions are deteriorating every single day. Can the courts help? The courts could. The courts have not been a bulwark for voting rights over the course of this last decade. So I think it's possible that certain circuit courts might help. Certainly the ACLU and Common Cause and the Campaign Legal Center and the Lawyers Committee on Voting on civil rights have all been aggressive, and they are out there. Mark Elias of the Democratic Party have been out there doing, serious, important work, and they have won a number of important victories on witnesses and the like this year. But there have also been losses at the U.S. Supreme Court back in April, for example, on this very question of postmarking. The court said that Wisconsin was well within its rights if it wanted to just continue to, not count the ballots that had arrived afterwards. So it's really up in the air. If these states wanted to do one thing to help, if Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin wanted to do something, they could change their law and allow these ballots to begin to be counted before Election Day. Those three states that determined the course of the Electoral College outcome in 2016, they all do not allow local election offices to begin counting ballots until Election Day itself. So what we might see is the President of the United States going on TV on election night declaring victory before all of these votes in these states have been counted. And then he's going to say all of these late arriving and counted ballots are the mail-in ballots. These are the rigged, fraudulent ballots. And then this all ends up back in the courts with the backdrop of Electoral College deadlines and everything else that we saw in 2000 on Bush versus Gore. And all three of those states, gerrymandered state legislatures, Democrats get more votes, Republicans have the seats. Could you then see the electoral votes in those states being cast by state legislatures as the Constitution allows, as Bush versus Gore upheld? That's the kind of scary situations we could well be looking at as a result of the voter suppression and the post office just being whacked.
So if people can vote in person, you'd suggest they vote in person?
It's a pandemic, so I'm not going to tell you to go out and vote in person if you don't feel safe. But
if you feel
doing that, so this is the challenge, right? For all of these months, we've been telling people vote by mail and try to take pressure off of the in-person voting system. And now you almost have to vote in person if you can to take pressure off of the post office.
Jeez, unreal. Absolutely crazy. So you say that he can't cancel the election. In New Zealand, I understand we have a different government, but in New Zealand, they've postponed the election. Why can he not do something like that? I mean, I can't believe we're even having these conversations right now. This is like we're on another planet. Can Donald Trump cancel the election? David, please.
No, he cannot. That power is given to Congress by statute. Democrats have one branch of Congress. It's not going to happen. When Trump suggested a couple of months ago that maybe he would have to go ahead and postpone the election, that was the only time that Mitch McConnell and a bunch of other voices in the Republican Party stepped up and said, no, that's a line too far. So I don't think we have to worry about a canceled election. What we do have to worry about is an election that has been sabotaged, that has been delegitimized, and which there could be massive amounts of intentional votes suppression.
Can we talk briefly just about the courts and how many judges Trump has chosen and what we're potentially facing, even if we do have a Biden administration, a Harris administration, another Democrat for the next 40, 50 years?
Republicans have really stacked the courts. They were able to put a hold on Obama filling a lot of judgeships back.
How did they do that?
Well, Mitch McConnell is very, very good at slowing down Senate machinery, and Republicans had the Senate and the House, and they were simply able to not confirm judges. We saw it on Merrick Garland, in which they simply would not confirm a Supreme Court justice. But this also happened at the federal level. You had hundreds of seats that were just essentially frozen in place. And when Donald Trump took office in January 2017 with a Republican Congress, the gears of those judicial nominations moved swiftly. So the courts have been packed and filled now for, perhaps a generation. And what we have seen already is that is that Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell have been urging conservatives on the court to retire this year, if they're thinking about that, so that they can quickly confirm somebody into that spot. Because evidently the rule they invented back in 2016 about not filling these seats in the middle of an election year, I guess they just kind of made that up out of thin air. But the federal bench can be expanded. It's not just the U.S. Supreme Court that needs reform. All of these circuit courts, it's not unusual to add judges to them. A lot of these circuit courts are stretched and strapped, and they need more judges. So if Democrats are able to take over with trifecta power, they need to be aggressive and progressive and super quick, because we all know the kind of backlash election that could come in 2022. Democrats might have 2 years to get all of this done, or else all of this structural morass is with us for a long, long time.
Yeah. If they can focus their energy on actually fighting Republicans instead of progressives, maybe. So in terms of if we do have a trifecta of power, if we win back the Senate and hold Congress and expand our majority and hopefully win the presidency, what would top 3 agenda items in terms of protecting the vote and unraveling what Republicans have done? What would you say Democrats should focus on?
We need a new voting rights act, a voting rights act that fully restores the preclearance and Section 5 protections that were built in the 1960s and that were gutted by Justice Roberts and this court back in 2013. I think we need a federal constitutional protection of our right to vote, which simply is not there. Does that
exist in other countries? I mean,
it does. It exists in other countries. It exists in many U.S. states, but it does not exist at the federal level. And that kind of protection would really be crucial in the courts. And I think we need to understand the connection between voting rights and the conservative bench right now. And we need to do something structurally to fix the problem of state legislatures passing intentionally suppressive measures that make your right to vote count less depending on where it is in the country you live. It should not be the case that it is easier to vote in Oregon than it is in Mississippi, but it simply is. And then last, quickly, I mean, I think we have to think about the deeply anti-majoritarian structure of the U.S. Senate, which perhaps might be the most structurally racist institution in all of America. The way that it's been designed, the way that it is set up, and the way that if it continues to function this way without reform, is only going to become more anti-majoritarian over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. You are going to have something like 70% of the population represented by 30% of the Senate, which means a huge block on not only progressive legislation, but any legislation that the majority of Americans want to see can be blocked by these small, rural, white, older, conservative states. If Democrats don't do something about this, given the opportunity, they will pay for it for another generation.
Do you think that, if we get the Senate back and Senator Schumer becomes the leader, do you think that's something that he would prioritize?
No.
How did I know you were going to answer that way? That's reassuring. Great. Somebody primary him, please.
I look forward to being pleasantly surprised, but I'm not going to bet much on it.
This is ultimately the frustrating, I think, the dynamics that we're dealing with here. David, any points of hope before we go? Because I feel extremely depressed now.
Yes. sometimes I walk around with that dark cloud over me. You know, I'm the character from Peanuts. No, I think that we can take a lot of hope. And I wrote an entire new book about all of the pro-democracy movements that are happening around this country. 5 states in 2018, and they were unusual states: Missouri, Michigan, Utah, Colorado, Ohio, passed redistricting reform,
right,
often with 60-70% of voters signing on. Florida passes Amendment 4, restoring voting rights to 1.4 million people who'd had a felony conviction in their past. And I know that the state legislature has moved to gut it, but almost 2/3 of the population of Florida got behind an issue of basic fairness and racial fairness. You had ranked choice voting in Maine. You had all of these things happen around the country that were just not only super important, but they happened in unusual states and red states, the expansion of Medicaid in Idaho and Nebraska. And they happened because citizens got up and they started movements in their states. They knocked on doors, they petitioned, they persuaded their neighbors, and their neighbors could be persuaded because they still believed in fairness and in the values we want to believe in. So I think that there is a lot of hope we can take away from all of that.
It's almost like populism appeals to the left and the right for working people in those populist states. Got to get back to basics. David, it's been a pleasure. David is the author of Rat Fucked, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, his latest one, How Americans Battled Back to Save Democracy, what he was just discussing, the former editor-in-chief of Salon, expert on all things voting and democracy. And I'm always fascinated by our conversations. I learned so much. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Anytime at all. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Up next, we have Scotty Nels Hughes, who was a surrogate for Donald Trump. Let's see if she's still a Trumpster. I'm ready for a fight, but she's on RT America of all places. So I'm gonna have to ask her if Putin is putting her up to joining our show today. It's really important. We got to get to the bottom of that. That's up next. But before you stick around for the next segment, make sure to click subscribe, smash that like button, the alerts, and join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We will see you in a second with Scotty Nels Hughes.
What happened to it?
Those in favor of
Donald Trump
will say aye. Those opposed
Hillary Clinton
shall say no. The ayes have it.
Hillary Clinton.
Let me ask you this question. Are you safer than you were 8 years ago?
What happened to there's no black America? There's no black America. There is just America. What happened to it? America. What happened to it? There's no black America. There is just
Blue lives matter in America. Quite frankly, somebody with a nice tan needs to say this. All lives matter.
what happened to America? What happened to it?
There will be good times and hard times and unexpected turns. It will not be a Trump contest without excitement.
I can't watch it anymore, Dorsey. I can't. It's too painful. How angry Giuliani is, man. Get ready for it. We're going to be watching that. We are going to be watching that all. We're going to do it for you and give you the rundown so you don't have to go through the pain of watching the RNC. But we will We will occasionally have some conservatives on this week to show the differences and kind of get to the bottom of it. Our next guest is Scotty Nell Hughes. I have known Scotty for several years now. We used to go head to head on cable, on CNN, on Fox News, all the networks, and we developed a rapport. They liked putting us on with each other. She's the host of News Views Hughes. That's a tongue twister. I had to practice it a few times. On RT America. She was a former surrogate for Donald Trump. You may remember she was a CNN commentator. They profiled her on SNL, if for those of you who didn't watch her on conservative media. But I was reading her bio, and I didn't even realize this. Scotty, I'm just going to go through it. You were also in the first group of radio talk show hosts that the DoD sent to view the front lines of Operation Enduring Freedom in Iraq and Kuwait, as well as Guantanamo Bay detention facilities in Cuba. I had no idea. Fascinating.
Things you learn about each other. You would have thought we would have learned at Nomiki in our little road trip during the blizzard of New Hampshire, but we had lots to talk about in that conversation.
We fought the whole time.
Well, we did it. We did it. I think maybe that's the reason why we've been able to be friends, because of all people on the other side of the aisle, you're one of those that I actually know you actually believe what you're talking about, and you do it from a good soul. It's coming from an honest heart. And that's why I keep beating my head up against the wall going, why hasn't your party recognized what a jewel they have in you and put you in? I mean, I'm glad you're on air, but you really need to be in office because you actually believe it. Unlike what we're seeing in a lot of the Republican Party, and I'm sure exists on the other side, a lot of opportunists. And those are the ones that do the most damage to both of our parties. So that's where we have that mutual respect with each other. We actually believe what we're talking about.
Yeah, we believe very different things, but we believe in what we're talking about. So Scotty, are you, I haven't checked in with you in a while, are you still pro-Trump?
I am pro-Trump from the perspective that Ronald Reagan said it's the 80-20 rule, 80%. I am pro-Trump, the beliefs, the policies, the administration that he's supposed to stand for, not necessarily for all the people that's within his administration. And there's a big difference of it. Nomiki, you mentioned the whole thing about me going to Iraq because I have seen what a war zone has done. And in the last 2 years, I've been to Vietnam. I've been down to Argentina. I've seen what war does to communities and to countries, and wars that we should never have even been involved in. And so, especially as my children continue to get closer to that age of 18, it has now become my whole heart to do everything I can in my power to avoid America getting into one of these countless, never-ending wars that have nothing to do with our country.
So I hear you, and that's one of the reasons I support Bernie Sanders is he is not for intervention, but he also votes against military budgets and expanding military powers and does not want to depend on oil, is all for the divestment movement, and we know how interrelated the production of oil and the financial benefit of much of the Republican Party and the cronies that Donald Trump brought in. And I wouldn't be surprised if his family members are somehow looped into, wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, the dependency on oil. So, I mean, Scotty, how can you be against wars, whatever form that is, and still support a president who has continued to support expanding the military budget, continues to support putting people in positions of power who have been intertwined into the moneyed systems of oil production or expansion, of drilling, like in the Arctic right now? I mean, these are all related. So if you're against war, how can you still be on that side?
So let's break it down. Let's look at Afghanistan, where President Trump, when he campaigned in 2016, was to bring all of our military home from Afghanistan. I mean, you literally have children who were born as their dads were being sent off to Afghanistan, now being sent off to Afghanistan. Yeah. President Trump campaigned on that. That was a common issue that I think he was able to speak to all of us in America. And he promised to bring them home. He has tried. Unfortunately, what you're having to see, and this exists both in the Democrats and the Republicans, this military-industrial complex that literally rules Washington, D.C. And it rules within the Secretary of State's office right now, and it rules a lot in the Pentagon. So the problem right now, I agree, in the military budget, there is so much superfluous spending that doesn't actually go to our soldiers. It's kind of like education. If the money was actually going to properly pay those that are in the military for housing and education and make their families' lives better for the sacrifice that they are doing for our country, I'm all for it. But just like with education, that money somehow is losing it from the taxpayer dollars to Washington, D.C., and then it's just disappearing. And it's never going to actually help those families. So, yes, I believe in actually having a strong military as a source of defense and deterrence. What I don't believe is continuing to pour all the money that we do into these contracts and these outside groups that come in and just literally suck taxpayers dry, because there's zero accountability right now within the Department of Defense. And unfortunately, that has plagued the Trump administration. It's plagued the Obama administration. It has plagued the last 40 years, unfortunately, in Washington, D.C. And I was hoping Trump would come in and be able to be able to kind of get the rats out. He's tried. I don't think that it's really
he's
hard
the
when you're surrounded by
president. He
them.
appoints the Secretary of State. He appoints, right. Every single person is, the buck stops at the presidency. So,
Absolutely.
There was a report last week that was published about, we want to talk about government waste. There was money that was spent, DOD money went directly to buying off some oligarchs who were buying up houses in Los Angeles, like these big mansions in Beverly Hills. This was a big report that came out, the direct correlation between people who met, oligarchs who met with the Kurdish oligarchs who met with the Trump administration, and yet, there's no oversight, but also there's no concern. So I just don't understand how you can be supportive of these things. And government waste, yes, it does exist, and it definitely exists with these contracts. Education, I think, is a completely separate subject. Education is being starved, specifically starved, so that it can be privatized, so Betsy DeVos and her cronies can continue to make money off of privatizing, shutting down, starving, and privatizing public services like education. She's doing it in Puerto Rico right now. It just doesn't make sense to me how one of the fixtures of the Trump administration, I love you, Scotty, but it doesn't make sense how you can continue to support. But I want to talk about the economy for a second, because the economic collapse has incinerated more than 30 million jobs. And I hear Donald Trump's talking about the stock market a lot, but we need a plan for the jobs market. So just for some perspective, before the crash, the economy had generated about 7 million new jobs under President Trump, as he likes to claim. A lot of them gig jobs, a lot of them not full-time, a lot of them not without benefits. But to put America back on work, we need to better 4 times as many jobs as were created in the entire term of Trump's presidency. So you've covered business. Can you honestly say that Trump has a plan to create 30 million jobs? And if so, where is it? We haven't heard anything.
Absolutely, and I agree. It does need to be released. He needs to go into details. But more importantly, once again, the reason why he was able to continue the strong economic recovery and actually put it even more into a fast pace was the fact that he deregulated and allowed these small businesses and businesses to be able to grow. He literally cleared out a lot of the regulations that had been put on business and the taxes that have been put on them. So once again, you go back to the drawing board. You figure out how we can sit here and take off, and that includes rolling back the employee tax base, and you roll that back, and we do what we can right now to get small business able to open up again. But it's not going to happen, Nomiki, as long as we keep our cities closed down.
Scotty, small businesses have been hurting during this new economy. You have monopolies buying up small businesses, absorbing them. That's not true at all. Small businesses have not been growing. And the deregulation means what? So monopolies don't have any oversight and they can exploit workers and work. In New York, for instance, the taxi industry, there's a suicide epidemic because you have Uber and Lyft who have been completely unregulated, making it so that taxi owners, their entire life's earnings have been devalued to zero. You want to talk about deregulation? It's called the individuals.
But let's talk about you. It's interesting you bring up the cabs, because I get it. If it was as simple as one person owning their permit to operate their cab, that would be great. But you know that's not how it's always been. And it's not how it is right now. You actually have it's sort of a version of a mob boss that owns the permits of 10 taxi cabs, and they own the medallions, and it's traded just like it has always been. That's not how it works.
Yes,
that shouldn't be how it works.
But
that shouldn't be.
Uber drivers are literally making less money than they would have under tax. Every driver is losing, except in the old space. It was a competitive, you want to talk about free market, it was a competitive industry, medallion based, but all drivers were able to earn a living wage and buy houses in Queens, in Brooklyn, in other parts of New York. I mean, that you can have a real working income as an immigrant. Now everything is devalued. Workers are making barely enough to survive, whether you're an Uber worker or not. And of course, it's being concentrated. The money is being concentrated to the top, to the unregulated owners of these industries, with these monopolies who are literally absorbing the ability for small businesses to pay their workers fully, to provide benefits. I mean, a country cannot soar. We cannot have a soaring economy. We cannot rebuild ourselves if we do not make sure that workers have benefits during a pandemic. So the pandemic.
There's a difference between that's the thing, Nomiki, where the left and the progressives believe that should be provided to by the government. That the government should be the civil.
No, I'm saying we need a living wage. The living wage. I mean,
your living wage in New York is different from a living wage in Nashville. That's the difference.
It's not $7 It shouldn't be $7 anywhere. I mean, the living wage in New York would be $33. In Nashville, it would be $20.
That is but you can't survive right now. Businesses couldn't afford to stay afloat with that. And Nomiki, come on.
That's not true.
They couldn't. They can barely survive right now.
It's not because of wages,
that they're going to have to do $20 a week. Absolutely how they can pay their employees. What we saw underneath the Obama administration is what you were seeing people take down from a full-time employee when they were forced to provide for them health insurance. You saw them being taken down to part-time, and you saw them just hiring more part-time employees.
That's why Medicare for All is a great solution.
If we could afford it, I agree with you.
We can absolutely afford. We can afford your defense budget. You don't want to pay for defense? Guess what? Great opportunity to cut the defense spending so we're not spending money on missiles that go nowhere, that just sit there, literally billions of dollars on missiles and hundreds of thousands of dollars on couches. You want to play the waste game. There's a lot of Pentagon waste that we could be using to make sure that we can pay for Medicare for All, which is a drop in the bucket. And also it's an investment in our economy. When people aren't going bankrupt, they can now spend their money on small businesses. It's a consumer-based economy. We know that this is a consumer-based economy. So the more people make, the more small businesses flourish. A lot of small businesses are hurting right now. Yes, because of the healthcare system. You are right. We have a broken healthcare system. But also in cities like New York, for instance, the rents are so outrageously high that they cannot even afford to pay their workers more, especially during the pandemic. Everybody's got to shutter. There's no rent control in big cities across America. And so out of the pandemic, you're going to see small businesses shutter. You're going to see people lose their jobs. You're going to have to move. Obviously, there's a rent freeze, but there's no cancellation of rent. So the entire economy is going to shift, if it isn't already, in a second. And I just don't understand how Donald Trump still is not acknowledging the effects of this pandemic. He barely even acknowledges the pandemic in general. Because if he were to acknowledge the pandemic and the death rate of 170,000 Americans, at least, then he would have to acknowledge his part in contributing to the economic collapse. So, I mean, I guess my question is right now, how is he going to address, just before we wrap up, Scotty, how is he going to address the pandemic this week? What do you expect?
Well, and that's the thing, and I want to answer, but real quick to you, Nomiki, I 100% agree with you. I absolutely believe, I wish that we lived in a world where we could take, instead of spending money on bombs that go nowhere, and put it actually directly in the pockets of our small business and our citizens. Unfortunately, we have corruption in our governments at every single level. And it's not just going to take one president that's going to worm it out. It is going to take the people actually taking back over the government. But that is something that's been just entrenched for the last 50 years. That's why Trump was so appealing in 2016, because people thought since he was on the outside, he was going to come in and truly drain the swamp. What we found, that swamp is still there, and it might even be a little bit more stanky now. How is he going to...
You heard it here first. Stankier swamp under the Trump administration, former Trump surrogate.
And that's me saying it just because of the people that I've watched him be allowed to take leadership positions. Whether he knew their backgrounds or not, I can't necessarily
his
say.
Son-in-law? I mean, I think he knew his son-in-law's background.
Well, that's a whole nother issue. But that being said, for this week, I think what you're going to see is he is going to try to put, after last week where there was such a somewhat negative tone that every single night, very sombering tone, because I get it. If you're a Democrat right now, you're sad. There's not much to look forward to in the world as long as it's under Trump. I think from everything that I'm reading, they're going to try to present a more positive, that America was great. It still is. We just have to get back up and running, and we're going to be better than ever. It's going to be a lot more of an optimistic tone. Just get out your sunshine and roses, because you're going to hear a lot of that, I think, this week from the people. Inspiring messages. They did a little bit of that last week in a good way, but I think you're going to hear even more of that this week.
I think it's delusional. I just want to say that. Absolutely delusional. And I think there's going to be a lot of fear mongering, as there always is in the convention. But Scotty, I appreciate your consistency. I do feel like there is a path for you to come to the left. We heard your criticism of the Defense Department.
You just killed my
criticism. I mean, you're for Medicare for all. Your mindset is just that we can't afford it. I think if I were to show you the numbers, you could see that we could. So maybe if we move you back from Nashville, Tennessee to New York,
I would be the only person moving into New York right now.
It's true, but there's some opportunities.
There's a good reason why I'm here and not there.
New York is a great city. It's had a lot of hardship. Guess what? You can sit outside and you can eat right now. So
you can also get income tax.
Taxes pay for schools and they pay for Medicare for all. So it's important to pay.
And corrupt politicians and bombs that go to nowhere.
Okay, we're never going to finish this. Scotty, thank you. This is why I don't have conservatives on, guys, because it'll just be an hour of victory.
I was a good one.
We get along.
You can handle me.
I can handle, that's it. I can laugh with you because I know deep down in your heart, you're actually Democrat. You're actually progressive, actually. That's it. All right. Scotty, thank you for joining Scotty Nell Hughes. She is the host of, I have to say this without jumbling it.
Laughing.
Host of News Views Hughes on RT Network. I didn't even ask you about Putin. How much is he paying you?
Next time.
All right. Okay, guys. I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you, Scotty. Tomorrow, same time, same place, 3 o'clock Eastern to 4 o'clock Eastern. We're going to have a great show. We're going to talk about how the movement responds to the fear tactics that we know are going to happen. We're already seeing it in the lineup. The fear tactics of the GOP, how they are pushing to divide communities across the country and suppress the vote, which we talked about today. But I want to thank you all. Make sure to click like and subscribe. Thank you to Dorsey. Thank you to Kyle. Thank you to Kelly. Thank you to George. Thank you to Ruthie. Do I have everybody? And thank you to our guests, of course, Scotty and David Daley. We will see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. at the Nomiki Show.
Quite frankly, somebody with a nice tan needs to say this. All lives matter.
What happened to America? What happened to it?
I don't want to watch this anymore.
Hard times and unexpected
Freakish.
turns. It would not be a Trump contest without excitement.
What is her speech going to be like?